Welcome back. Now, look, I've already spoken a number of times about Labor's new vehicle emissions targets and how they're going to end up being the toughest in the world. Now, the targets, starting next year, by the way, January 1, aim to reduce car emissions by 60% in 5 years. Now, stick with me here because there's a whole lot of complicated stuff being put out there by our mate Chris Bowen. Now, it's set to add, depending on who you listen to, thousands to the price of new cars. And the hardest hit will be utes. You got the Ford Ranger, the Toyota Hilux, and the Isuzu D-Max. They're our top three selling cars, utes, and they will struggle to meet the new targets without a radical change. Now, I want to get to the bottom of this. Joining me now is Carexpert co-founder Paul Maric, who I've spoken to a lot about this. Paul, let's just cut to the chase. We have a messy, complicated debate going on here. On the one hand, we've got fuel quality. Then you've got emission regulation on new vehicles and you've got EVs. Let's start with what happens on January 1. What happens?
January 1, things get pretty complicated. Car manufacturers are up for massive fines that they can either pay to the government or pay as credits to companies like Tesla who don't have any emitting vehicles. But it's going to mean that you as a consumer are going to be paying more for cars because at the end of the day, a car company needs to make money and they're not going to be
Well, let's follow the money. So I'm a Toyota dealer and I'm selling Toyota Hiluxes. Come January 1, I'm selling the same Toyota Hilux as I'm selling today, am I not?
Yeah, absolutely. They don't have a product ready to go yet.
Some public servant is going to be tracking how many Hiluxes I sell and send me a bill because they don't meet the new regulations. Is that how that works?
Absolutely, because the cars are above this level they're trying to implement. They're trying to model it off the States as well. And the funniest part about that is in the States, they're looking to wind it back. And in addition to that, the bigger the vehicle is, the less it's impacted because they know that people are buying big pickup trucks.
Well, you and I know that the dealer margins are slim. They don't make a lot of money out of selling one car or two cars or three cars. So they're going to pass it on to the consumer. So your Toyota, what would an average Toyota Hilux cost you?
Look, I mean, the most common one's probably going to be an SR5, about 60 grand, 65 grand,
So the penalty's going to be around about $5,000 or $6,000 on that car? So that'll go straight onto the bottom line of the price. So how's Chris Bowen stand up in Parliament and start reading out that car prices never went up in the United States when the fuel quality was changed? That's the example he used.
Yeah, look, it's totally idiotic. So in the States, I mentioned that the bigger the vehicle is, the less it's affected by this. Best-selling vehicle in the States is the Ford F-150. So the price of that didn't go up because it wasn't affected by this. So I just think that they haven't looked far enough into this. They don't know what Australians are buying. And the biggest insult is that if you're an Australian that wants to do something better or greener, there is no alternative for a ute. There is no alternative for a Land Cruiser. If you're driving around Australia, you're not going to be doing it in an electric SUV.
No, we're not. So we'll get onto that argument about EVs and utes and what they can do and what they can't do as electric cars in a moment. So Chris Bowen is trying to convince us all that this will have no impact whatsoever. But that's simply not true.
No, exactly. And look, I actually think it will have a negative impact on car companies and dealers as well. Because if you're in the market for a new Hilux, for example, why would you spend an extra 5 or 10 grand on one when the one that you've got now was 5 or 10 grand less on the 31st of December? So I think we'll have less people buying new cars. Those that are forced into buying them, like tradies, will then pass on that cost to a consumer. So you've got record cost of living here, and a tradie who's going to have to fork out an extra 10 grand for their ute and has to come and do your electrical work, he's going to pass that cost on to you.
So when Labor says this is just the coalition trying to make the argument like Scott Morrison did that EVs will wreck your weekend and that utes are not going to be able to, electric utes that don't exist, I mean, this is a real political question. I mean, the coalition should seize upon this, or Anthony Albertini's got to say to Bowen, mate, these cars are going to cost more. You've got to drop off this stuff.
Absolutely. And the car manufacturers do not have alternatives. You cannot materialise an alternative by the 1st of Jan. So there will be at least a 1 or 2 year period before we even see vehicles in that segment that are even close to being able to meet these emissions regulations. So they've just not met with anyone in the industry to actually figure out how this is all going to work.
So Bowen stands up in Parliament with a bit of paper, and so he gets a question from an opposition MP who lives in a particular seat. And he quotes how many average kilometres the people who live in that seat do. And then he says they will save $1,200 because the petrol won't cost them as much, or they won't use as much petrol. That's a complete crap argument. That's not true.
It's insane. So they're looking into the future where they'll have these fuel-efficient vehicles. But ultimately, if you're a consumer today that can't afford to feed yourself, you're not in the market for a new car. So how on earth are you ever going to be in the market for a more expensive electric vehicle that's meant to save you money? I mean, the argument just does not stack up at all.
So you have a great, with Carexpert, you have a great global view of motoring. Yep. Tell me, around the world, what electric vehicle, what EV utes are there currently?
Not many. And
so we saw in Parliament the other day, someone was quoting this LDV thing out of China and the range it could do.
Yep.
And then when you put a load in it, which is what you buy for,
that's it.
The range comes back. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, the range was about 300 Ks, and that's before you even
this thing cost $90,000.
Yeah, 90 grand. So it's an extra 20 grand above.
It's a cheap Chinese ute for 90 grand. Who would want it?
I don't know. And then you look at stuff like the F-150 Lightning, which is the best-selling full electric ute in the States. Same story. If you try and tow with it, your range is reduced by about 2/3. So, okay, great, you can have an electric ute, but you just can't do anything with it. What is the point in that?
So these are mostly Chinese produced?
Yeah, look, at the moment...
The Chinese are getting better at making cars.
Absolutely,
they're not as good as the Koreans or the Japanese.
And it's not even about where it's made. It is the physics of a ute. It needs a big battery. The bigger the battery, the more energy you need to move the vehicle. Second you put a load on it or try and tow with it, if you want to drive around Australia at the moment, there is not an electric vehicle out there that will be suitable for that job. And you would not be seen dead in the middle of nowhere with an electric vehicle hoping that you're going to make it to the next PowerPoint.
Well, you guys did a really interesting experiment. We talked about this on air before, about two cars, identical BMWs that went up to Sydney. It was more expensive for the EV. The federal government, in its wisdom, has gone out and replaced its Commonwealth car fleet with a whole bunch of expensive BMW electric vehicles. One worth 130 and one worth 150. That's outrageous. I mean, why wouldn't they go and buy an MG electric vehicle and drive around in them?
That's a good question. I was literally at BMW returning a car the other day, and they were taking delivery of them, and there was 25 of them parked out the front. It is insane. And that is a car with a sticker price, like you said, 130, 150 grand.
How many of them were there?
It was a whole row of them. So, I mean, it is baffling to me, even if you have a look at Victoria, right? Victoria, we are in so much debt here. It's one of the most poorly run states in Australia. And you have police driving around in BMW X5s, BMW 5 Series. It's a $120,000 car.
What I loved was the Commonwealth car drivers were sitting around studying maps on where to charge all these things while they brought them down here for ASEAN. Good luck finding the charges. Paul, it's always great to see you, mate.